The Spin-off Podcast Network. Contact Energy's good plans give you periods of free or discounted power. The more of your current energy usage you shift to these times, the more you could save. Learn more about these plans at contact.co.nz/goodplans. Conditions, fair use policy and eligibility criteria apply. Power refers to electricity.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to Gone By Lunchtime. This is Toby Manhire with a very special Trans-Tasman edition of Gone By Lunchtime. We are joined today by Ben McKay, who many of you will remember was the New Zealand correspondent for Australian Associated Press for some period of time, based in the Press Gallery in Wellington. And now he has moved to New Zealand's West Island, Tasmania. How's it been, Ben? You're now the Pacific editor for AAP.
Yeah, that's right. I'm having a very Australian morning, actually. A wallaby got into our back garden.
Oh, wow.
And knocked down a fence, and so my dog set off after the wallaby. I had to cross a couple of roads, and I did this with my 2-year-old in hand. That was a silly decision. And then as I went to put them in the car for drop-offs to daycare, a big huntsman on the car. So really living the dream.
That's amazing. What are the ethics with wallabies? Are you is your dog allowed to go after a wallaby, or is that, would that be seen as? It's
sort of a policing issue, right? Like, how do you stop them? But Wellington is dog heaven, you know, they love dogs everywhere because there aren't any mammals. So bringing the dog over here, she just loves every scent and is taking off after it. And there are far fewer sort of leash off areas to protect all of our little critters.
Well, we'll give my love to Mabel. For the time being, it's Mabel, right? Did I get that
right?
That's
right.
Yeah. Well done, me. Hey, let's talk about, I know that Australia is fizzing with excitement. I'm saying with perhaps a spoonful of tongue-in-cheek about the election that is approaching this very Saturday. There isn't a huge amount of excitement, let's be honest, is there?
No, there's really not. It's been decried as visionless, as boring, and I think that's by design. I think most parties want to keep it straight and narrow. I mean, there has been a sort of electricity come out of the Peter Dutton campaign this week, I think, which is really him flipping the switch to try and see if he can get something else to stick. We've had a bit of culture wars and a bit of attacking journalists and whatnot. It's not yet clear whether it's too little or too late.
Yes, he's calling the ABC and the Guardian Australia hate media, which is a lot of fun. Well, let's get back to Dutton, but let's just rewind briefly to the start of the year, because at that point, most of the polls were showing, I don't know, maybe a 2-point gap lead for the coalition over the incumbent Labour Party of Albanese. Dutton seemed kind of reinvented in a way when I glimpsed at it. There seemed to be a bit of, he's got some new spectacles. He seems to be holding himself a bit differently and shaking off some of that skin, which is, he used to be seen, I guess, as a bit of a, trying to think what the correct terminology, a bit of a nasty bastard. He sort of had that image of. So I've got a
list of greatest hits for you soon.
Oh, good. Look forward to that. At that point, though, it looked as though Albanese could lead Labour to that historic thing, even more rare in Australia than it is in New Zealand. Both countries having 3-year terms, a one-term government hasn't happened since 1931, I think. And it looked as though that might be where we're heading. He was struggling. He's having a tough time. It's shifted now. Now everyone seems to be saying that Albanese is going to, if not coast, all the polls are pointing to a victory. Tell us what's changed in those few months.
Well, I mean, I think for the last 3 years, the first 2.5 years of the Albanese government, it's really been about cost of living. It's been about his big mission, which has been the voice referendum, which obviously lost. And so for the first 2.5 years, people are feeling economic pain, and they are the defining issue is Indigenous rights in Australia, which obviously went into the toilet. That's changed this year as the contest becomes real. So the one sentence answer, I think, to that question is that people have now been asked to make a choice, and they're drilling down into that choice. And I think the electorate, or enough of the electorate, has basically gone, wait a minute, I don't want Peter Dutton to be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And he's a known factor. Unlike the last change of government from the left to the right in New Zealand, when Chris Luxon was really not a known factor, Dutton very much is. In Parliament since 2001, Queensland cop before he entered, and he's got one of the greatest rap sheets in Australian politics. Can I offer you now the greatest hits of his comments that might linger? So he boycotted the Stolen Generations apology under Kevin Rudd in 2008. Takes a special type of politician to do that. He was caught calling a journalist a mad fucking witch, or texted her that in 2014. He grumbled under a hot mic about Pacific leaders who are wasting his time at a Pacific Islands forum. He said, quote, "Time doesn't mean anything when you're about to have water lapping at your door." He refused Jacinda Ardern's offer to resettle asylum seekers. In 2018, he said Melburnians were scared to go out because of African gangs. 2018 was quite a good year for the highlights reel. He said that white South Africans needed help from a, quote, civilised country, unquote, like Australia. And he also lost a leadership ballot to ScoMo. And then in the more recently, those comments that resonated in New Zealand, where he said that Australia was taking the trash out in regards to New Zealand deportees when he was Home Affairs Minister. And he says he won't stand in front of Indigenous flags if elected. And he also said that he'd pull Australia out of the Paris Agreement. So we've got a lot of positions and just outright gaffes that are way far right of the Australian electorate. And one particularly poison chalice that's come to the fore this election campaign was in 2013. When the Libs returned to government under Tony Abbott, he was health minister. And they did a big budget push in 2014. And one of his measures that they proposed, they were trying to make savings and increase the bottom line everywhere, was a $7 co-payment for every doctor visit. So the notion of a free doctor visit, which we call here bulk billing, would have been gone. I mean, it's only $7, but it's a lot, right? The idea that you can go and see a doctor for free is a key part of the Australian health system. That eventually was backed down, but it led to him being voted as the worst health minister in the last 50 years by doctors. And it's why you see Anthony Albanese on the campaign trail everywhere, every stop. He holds a Medicare card saying this is how you get your health. And Peter Dutton wants to rip it away from you. It gives credence to the Labor scare campaign that the Libs will come after health. Yeah,
right. And there's also been race relations, you said, had sort of slipped away a bit after that voice referendum in recent times, but just in the last week.
Well, it's solved. It's solved, obviously.
That's terrific.
The vote was done.
Very happy for you. And just in the last week, there's been this fresh controversy around the "welcome to country" expression, and I think this emerged after, rather shockingly, a neo-Nazi, was it in Melbourne? Took exception to the use of "welcome to country" at an Anzac ceremony.
Yeah, it's sort of open season on this at the moment with the rise of the sort of far right. And One Nation, I should say, which has so long been, an outlier way away from the political
Pauline Hanson, is she back in the mix?
She's on track to double her vote, record their party's best ever result, around 10%, which is not that far south of the Greens.
Amazing.
But significantly as well, the Libs have done a preference deal with them. For so long, John Howard used to say, put them last. Now the Libs are putting them second and in a preference swap deal. But in any case, the Anzac Day imbroglio was very unfortunate. Some emboldened racists in the crowd called out, we don't need to be welcomed back to our own country. It's a really unfortunate part of the discourse, and I would just shout out to Liam Ratana's piece in the spin-off about that. It's a really worthwhile read. I would say that there are other positives to living in Australia. I don't know why I need to defend my country, but in any case. Yeah. It's all part of Dutton's
wallabies
sort of pivot
in the backyard.
Now. Yeah. It's all part of that pivot to try and see if something else can work.
Which is a sort of last gasp thing, right? There is a sense of what this is the kind of thing you do when you're grasping for anything to turn things around at the last minute?
Yeah, so my assessment is the strategy is threefold. See what sticks, last chance saloon. Also, an attempt to coax a few people flirting with Clive Palmer's trumpet of patriots mob, and the mining magnate who throws tens of millions at every federal election campaign, and Pauline Hanson's One Nation, because if those votes go there, you might think naturally they would preference the Libs, but actually there is some slippage so that they don't get all those votes. But it's also potentially thinking about the post-game. So if he were to lose, Peter Dutton would want another crack or continue on, a political survivor. So he's potentially saying to his very, very conservative caucus, I did try this in the election campaign.
Given the survival rate of leaders of Australian political parties, that seems pretty unlikely to me. I was amazed to see in a piece I read the other day that were Albanese to win this time, would be the first time that a leader of a party had been consecutively won elections since John Howard. Incredibly the bloodletting that goes on over there. You guys are ruthless.
Yeah, he'll be the first Labor person to do it since the 1980s. Since
Hawke, yeah, incredible. Hey, let's just a quick sidebar here, because you've mentioned a couple of times to preference and the idea of, and preferential voting is something we don't have in New Zealand. For these federal elections, it's a first past the post system, importantly, but preferential voting changes things a bit. Can you just give us a 101 on preferential voting?
Sure. So the best way to think about Australian elections is not as a single election like New Zealand's MMP environment. It's actually as 151 separate elections you've got to try and get to 76 to get over the line. But in each of those electorates, it's not just your first preference that counts. Let's say you voted for the Greens first and Labor second, but the Greens only got polled 10%. So those votes didn't count. Well, actually, your vote counts.
The Green
just
candidate,
as much.
To be clear, not the party.
Thank you. Thank you, Toby. Actually, your vote will count just as much as someone who voted for the Labor candidate, because when those votes are tallied up, it gets added to the pile. It goes down the list. So the counters will go down the list to make sure your vote ends up with somebody. And it means that a lot of the time, people win without having the highest number of first preferences. Yep. They win on sort of count back.
Yeah.
And it means that you get the least worst candidates rather than the most popular.
Yeah.
Am I using the right terminology?
Yeah, totally. Similar to, for example, the Wellington mayoralty, where there's a single transferable vote system, a similar system really, insofar as it means that someone who might come up with a plurality and win 36% of the vote is unlikely under preferential voting or is not guaranteed, that is to say, because they might be loathed by everyone else and ranked low, right?
Correct.
Yeah. What about in this election, again on Dutton, but just generally the atmosphere?
Well, it has been a referendum on Dutton.
Has it?
Absolutely. Because Albanese is offering sort of steady as she goes leadership.
Yeah.
Quite often he's asked, what is the singular thing that your government has achieved? And in the way that, Labor reforming governments have often pointed to different things, and he can't really do it because it has been, manage the economy through the storm. The voice failed. And the answer is sort of landed on his childcare, more affordable and accessible childcare with better pay for everybody. And to be honest, that is quite a big reform. But it doesn't really tick that box. So instead, it really has been about Dutton and his preparedness for office. And he's made so many mistakes, so many.
What about, I don't know if you know this guy, Donald Trump, who's the president of the United States. We've just seen in Canada a result that, again, certainly didn't look likely at the start of the year, with Mark Carney coming to power almost entirely on a platform of we need to stand up to Donald Trump. Not quite to that level in Australia, but still presumably Donald Trump has entered many rooms in terms of those debates, those conversations.
Yeah, and polling has been done to show that it has scared people off Dutton a little bit. I do think that it does make Australians potentially more cautious about a change, but it also presents a real challenge to both leaders of both parties to try and find that that language that sort of says because we're in a military alliance with the United States, like we are all the way with USA. And, we're spending tens of billions, hundreds of billions on AUKUS. We're proposing to the nuclear subs deal. So politicians have got to do that dance where they say, well, they're a trusted friend and partner. Obviously we're in this war battle together for civilization, and they're a democracy, and we love the USA and the UK, but at the same time, it's presented such a challenge to the global order that everyone can see that, but leaders can't really own it. They're not able to find the language to distance. So watching them try and do that dance has been quite interesting.
You broke a story last week about a New Zealand-related story, remembering that Labour under Albanese introduced a pathway to citizenship, smoothed out that process quite dramatically, and I think there was a big uptake on it for New Zealanders living in Australia. Do you want to just talk us through the story you broke on that?
Well, I think this is one of the most significant and underreported parts of Jacinda Ardern's legacy. So in late 2022, when she was still in office and Anthony Albanese had won, and just remember the environment that Albanese aspired to be like Ardern. Ardern was Australia's favourite politician. Her politics of kindness resonated in a place that had just lived through a lot of years of Scott Morrison. And Ardern flew for the quick meeting with Albanese. They swapped records. I think Grant Robertson might have had something to do with Albo ending up with a whole heap of Flying Nun records.
Yeah.
And they agreed there would be, firstly, a change to the deportations policy, the common sense test. Now, that's been really tested through this period of government with some people, some people that have stayed in Australia when they wouldn't have under the Liberal policy, leading some pushbacks. But there was also the change of citizenship practice. So previously, for 2 decades, a change was made under John Howard that New Zealanders would not have direct access to citizenship. They'd be sort of stranded as permanent residents. That denied them plenty of rights, the right to work in many public offices, to get cheaper uni degrees, to vote and to receive social security. What Labor did, what Anthony Albanese agreed, was that would become a natural pathway, open slather basically after 4 years, and massively slashed the money. Now, the Libs had a bet each way when that was announced in 2023 around Anzac Day. They said it might make the housing crisis work and might make traffic congestion work, and basically left it open. So I got the scoop, and I'm happy to tell you how I got it. I emailed the campaign headquarters.
Whoa!
Use that forensic technique.
Divulge your secrets.
I know, I'm willing to do it on this occasion. And they basically closed the door to reversing it.
Yeah.
So it's a huge win for New Zealand. It's one of those things that sort of flies under the radar, and that it'll affect like tens and tens of thousands of people have applied and got citizenship since then from New Zealand. Makes a huge difference in people's lives that we don't necessarily spend a lot of time talking about it.
No, and they've all got votes over there now too.
Well, they do. Yeah. And thank you for the little reminder to actually check on the electorates with the proportion of New Zealand population and where those swing goes, because a lot of them are in Queensland, where Kiwis tend to settle. Obviously, Labor did it thinking there might be a political dividend, as much as they didn't say that. It will be interesting to see how that goes on election night.
Another little bit of trans-Tasman energy is that the Liberals seem to have picked up on a few of National Party's campaigning approaches, the back on track stuff, is that? Yeah.
Get Australia back on track is the slogan. You might recall it from such election campaigns as 2023. The cull the public service has been a real talking point, although the Libs have absolutely butchered that over here. They haven't been able to settle on a number. And when it's going to be, they've used that same line about we're going to protect the front line and cull the back office. Hasn't really taken off as much as it did in New Zealand. And also there's I mean, this is nothing new, right? Like they swap policies and ideas all the time. Topham Guerin, the Digi Kiwis that helped Scott Morrison and Boris Johnson into office. They're over there with Dutton as well. But I must say, I mean, like, they're obviously, world leaders in winning elections for the centre-right. But I just think that, Luxon really leapt into that sort of campaign. He was happy to have the Mickey taken out of him, and he was, doing get ready with me videos and all that sort of stuff, and sort of won the online battle. Dutton has been much less pliable sort of candidate, hasn't been able to reach into that sort of, self-aware sort of grab bag of tricks. He's been too wooden to do it. So Chris Bishop, I think, is over there this weekend for the Nats, supervising how it goes, but I don't think they're going to have as good a night as they did in 2013 in New Zealand.
I mean, or are they? I mean, all of the polls, all of the chat is that this is going to be a Labour election, but I assume a number of people are also saying, well, certainly the coalition of Liberal Nats will be pointing to 2019, and in 2019, of course, Scotty from Accounts, Scott Robertson, a bit of a teddy bear when you put him beside Dutton and Tony Abbott, of course. He defied the pollsters and the predictions, came through and beat Bill Shorten. Is that a possibility? Is that a prospect?
The polling average in 2019, you're absolutely right. The polling average in 2019 was Australia, they use a two-party preferred measure to take into account preferences.
Yep.
So it was 51.5 to 48.5 in Labor's favour. Now, it turned out to be exactly the opposite, which is at the very edge of the margin of error. And the margin of error is important because, that's the polls getting it wrong, but also getting it wrong within the margin that they account for.
Yeah.
So let's do a poll check here. Roy Morgan and Essential have it at 53.47, News Poll at 52.48. So for them to get it wrong would just produce a bit of a dead heat. So it's, we're getting outside the margins of what is possible for a Liberal victory.
They'd have to be wronger, even wronger this time round for it
or they'd have to be right, but for some reason Australians swing at the last minute.
Right.
Because a poll can be right
this
weekend, but something can happen to change minds.
Sure, and were that to happen, in realistic terms, the likeliest scenario were things to go that way, or a realistic scenario is a minority government, isn't it? That means to say, and that's something that Labor will be thinking about. Yes,
I think, to be honest, the polling shows that Labor is on track now to increase its majority slightly.
Right.
They have a two-seat majority. It would be a smaller. It'd be a slightly large majority. I mean, then we get into the game of getting so granular. There could be a swing against in Victoria because the state government's not very popular. They could pick up a couple of seats in Queensland because of the Kiwis factor or a particularly rotten candidate in XYZ. So, we're amongst the margins. Minority government is very much on the table as a potential outcome. It would mean that a number of ways you could do that after the election. Albanese has said that in the event of a minority government, no deals. He'll take every vote to the floor and people can vote how they want. Dutton says that's a lie and he'll do a deal with the Greens like Labor did in 2010 for support.
Yeah.
But of course, we do have the group of Teals who you've written about in the past, these sort of climate and integrity concerned independents who have won coalition seats in the inner city. It remains to be seen they're going to vote with Labor on a number of issues. It remains to be seen whether anyone would do a deal with them or be offered a speakership or, those sort of balls to get across. It really depends on how the numbers fall and it will take some time.
Yeah. How are those Teal independents looking? I mean, many of them in the sort of urban New South Wales area. I've seen that the Liberals have been a bit more conscious of trying to stand particular candidates in those seats that tend to be women tend to be a bit more progressive and so on. Are those up for grabs or are they likely to retain broadly?
Absolutely up for grabs.
Yeah.
I think broadly most should be fine. I think in 2019, let's try to think of an analogy for this, Toby, thinking you might ask me. In 2022, rather, it was a wave. I think this time around we might describe the Teal seats as a warm paddling pool, like pleasant.
Oh, do we
nice
need
to sit in?
Yeah.
Is that not conjuring a nice image in your mind?
No, it's not for me. No, I don't. A warm paddle. I don't know. Maybe.
What about like a warm beach?
Okay. Yeah. A ripple. Maybe a ripple. Should we have like the sand between your toes and the.
All right. Well,
You know,
in an
the
attempt to get out
sea
of this
snakes
awkward
and sharks
analogy,
ripping in from Bondi Beach, wallabies.
I just mean to say, although we could expand it further on your thoughts if you'd like, that voters in the teal seat seem to be quite content with their representation.
Sure, yeah.
The biggest issue, though, for Teals, obviously it makes it harder for the coalition to get to 76, to get a majority if they're losing these seats. But the ripple effect is that it makes the coalition much more conservative. They lose these inner city seats that have been where the moderates in the party live.
Yeah.
And then you end up with a conservative leader like Peter Dutton, and you lose a lot of sort of...
You don't have those
moderate
voices in the party room, as you guys say, pulling them in another direction as well.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. What about the Greens? You mentioned the Greens. How are they looking? I mean, they tend to do better in Senate races because of different system. Are they starting to make any headway in terms of the federal election? Yeah.
So the short answer is yes. They'll maintain or slightly increase their Senate representation, you'd think. But similar to the New Zealand Greens, which have gone through the quote unquote year from hell. I've seen 1,000 think pieces about this. They're actually doing quite well in polling, though. And in Australia, the Greens tend to do best when Labor is in office, because if you can believe this, the Australian Labor Party tend to leave a little bit of space to their left when they govern. They tend to govern from the centre. So they're on track to score low double digits, which would be, one of their historic highs. Whether that produces any more House of Reps seats, it's not clear. They hold Melbourne and 3 inner city Brisbane seats. They're all really interesting races. Like Melbourne is as safe as houses. The Brisbane seats are interesting races against the Libs or three-way contests. They're eyeing up other electorates. It seems certain they'll win inner city Sydney seats when 2 sort of Labor lefties like Albanese and Plibersek move on. And that's when they'll become a real force, when you can sort of pencil them in for 5, 6, 7, 8 seats.
Just on the watery theme, since we were floating around there briefly, there was a story reported, I think in the last few days, certainly in the last week, in your own backyard, as it were, about salmon. And salmon, there was a big protest, but Tasmania is exercised about the politics of salmon. Can you talk us through that?
Yes. This is when you get into really hyper-local issues that can actually determine the election when it's a close national race. In Tasmania, in the last decade or so, we've had a real boom in farmed salmon.
Yeah.
And they're farmed in sort of waterways, but they're in such... It's essentially like a pig soul sort of situation, where they're in such close confines, and they excrete and they damage the environment, and the efforts in trying to maintain these pens through things like explosives to keep seals out, and the treatment that the salmon receive has enraged environmentalists down here. So that could genuinely swing a seat or two. And has caused a massive rift in the Labor Party about environmental protections versus jobs, which is one of the common fault lines for the party. And of course, it's no surprise that Tasmania is at the head of that, given our environmental track record.
Interesting. Hey, last thing, Ben, I bumped into a senior Labor MP in Auckland the other day and said, "Are you watching the Australian election very much?" And he said, yes, watching it very closely. And, of course, David Talbot, who's the pollster for Labor is in both countries, is over there working, and I'm sure feeding back morsels of information. If you put your New Zealand goggles back on, is there anything out of the election that you're observing at the moment, going to the polls in just a few days, that would go on your briefing sheet, lessons for either National or Labor in New Zealand as they gear up for an election in 2026?
A good question. I'd be interested in your thoughts too. I think the Trump factor is really interesting and how it's played out. I'm not yet, we're obviously going to need the result to know how it's landed. Everyone's cautious about going sort of dark MAGA and lumping in. And I think that's right if you're a candidate for being Prime Minister. But the coalition in New Zealand is probably likely to be able to manage having a bet each way on that, right? Because you've got Winston with the MAGA cap on, and it'll allow Luxon to sort of moderate on the side. I mean, the biggest take-home I've had from watching this election campaign is that the Dutton campaign has just been so woefully unprepared. So he didn't do a press conference in Canberra for months until the election and came in sort of under not quite up for battle. And it's produced some like gaffes in media conferences that he's not able to run away from. I mean, I don't really see that being an issue in the New Zealand election because it's just such a tradition that he'll, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader make them available for media as well. But it's kind of like in this election, sort of like the media strikes back. The rumours of the demise of journalists and mainstream media have been overblown. I mean, the daily press conferences, Dutton hasn't really signed up for it. I mean, a case in point is, and this is something that Luxon needs to be careful of, is support with women. All centre-right parties need to be concerned about that. I mean, probably his biggest gaffe of the campaign was that he said he wanted to end work from home arrangements and get people back to work. Yeah. When it was pointed out this policy had particularly helped women, he said that they could always job share, which, is not necessarily
And then he had to row that back entirely, didn't he?
Yeah, so he just came out and made it the story of the day one day and said, look, I got that wrong and we're not going to do it. But, I mean, the cake's sort of set when you make these mistakes. But, I mean, the other big lesson, I guess, is that anyone thinking that the coalition is in trouble in New Zealand now because of the economy, I think needs to just sort of have a bit of reality check, right? Because the game moves so fast. Inflation was out of control in Australia a couple of years ago. It's now not, it's not that burning issue, like the pitchforks aren't out for elbow. And you imagine when the New Zealand election rolls around, it's the government that's going to benefit, just like the Albanese government has now, from an improved situation. Yeah.
I wonder as well whether, and it's too soon, like you say, to be sure about any of this, but the Trump factor and all the other different rainstorms circling the globe. A few years ago, there was a sense that incumbents are out. There was a sense that there was an inclination towards booting out the incumbents because it was time for something else on the back of the broad cost of living crisis. Maybe that's tipped a bit now. Again, this is early, but when we look at Canada, the likely result in Australia, that maybe people want a little bit more of a security blanket, a little bit more of, as long, to feel the reassurance. And so maybe that's moved towards incumbency. Maybe incumbency is maybe at the margins, but is broadly a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Yeah. Look, I don't disagree with that whatsoever. I would also say that the rise of third parties or non-Liberal is something that is unavoidable. It's basically a third now, Labor, coalition, non-majors. So the Greens, One Nation, Trumpet, the rest. That will be fascinating to see if that trajectory continues at this election. Voters are casting about, that things aren't working for them in so many ways.
Ben, a total treat to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, and let's do this again soon.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And an idea, by the way, for the title.
Yes.
Really workshop this. Okay. I can't believe I let it too late.
Yep.
Because of the time difference, I was thinking it could be called Gone By Brunchtime.
Gone By Brunchtime. Okay, well, I'll take that to the committee.
Yeah. And does Mad Chapman get final say?
We'll see. It's an elaborate system, We need to make sure that a number of people are involved. Okay. Take it to the panel of the elders, see what they think.
Just know that this underslept dad spent a lot of time on that one.
Okay. No, good. Like I say, it's not for me to, it's not in my
I got it.
gift.
I got it.
Obviously.
I got it.
Yeah.
I can tell that, a lot of the time you're broadcasting, the handbrake is on.
That's right.
You're being really restrained.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Ben.
Cheers, Toby.
The Spin-off Podcast Network.